Let's kick things off with a fundamental question. Why does illegal migration exist, and why does it look so different depending on where you are in the world? If you've watched the news lately, you know this is more than just a border problem. It's a global issue shaped by politics, technology, economics, and human lives. Today, I'm taking you through a tour of 6 continents, unpacking how countries grapple with unauthorized migration. We'll see how their tactics think biometric tracking and offshore detention are as much a mirror of national identity as they are policy choices. Ready to dive in? Let's start with the United States, where the border itself is practically a character in the national drama. Now, imagine you're looking out over the US-Mexico border. On one side, high-tech surveillance drones, thermal sensors, and miles of steel fencing the physical deterrence. On the other, families hoping for a better life, sometimes fleeing violence. The U.S. uses a multi-layer deterrent strategy, combining physical barriers with cutting-edge surveillance technology. Think of drones as the border's eyes in the sky, and biometric systems as its memory, recording fingerprints and iris scans. But the real maze? Legal enforcement. Expedited removal can mean deportation in hours, while programs like DACA and the now-expired Title 42 reveal a tug-of-war between humanitarian relief and hardline enforcement. Now you might ask, does all this work? Data shows crossings dip temporarily after new barriers or laws, but migrants adapt. It's a perpetual cat-and-mouse game. Switching gears to Europe, France sits at the crossroads of freedom of movement and strict border control. As a Schengen member, France allows people to travel freely within most of Europe, but at its external borders, think Italy or Spain, story changes. Border police use risk profiling and document checks, but court interventions often disrupt deportations on humanitarian grounds. Centralized asylum processing sounds efficient, but reality bites. Systems are overloaded. France also collaborates through EU-wide frameworks, like the EU-Turkey deal, outsourcing some border management. It's a delicate dance between honoring asylum laws and managing public anxiety over irregular migration. Ever wonder if a policy can be both open and closed at the same time? France is living that contradiction. Picture Japan, bustling cities, orderly lines, and some of the tightest migration controls on Earth. Japan treats unauthorized stay with near zero tolerance. Overstayers are tracked, detained, and swiftly deported. At the airport, facial recognition and biometric tracking are the norm. Think of it as the country's digital moat. And when it comes to asylum, Japan approves less than 1% of applications annually. The labor market, meanwhile, is managed with surgical precision. Work visas fill gaps, but only inside tightly controlled programs. Japan's approach raises a question. Does strict enforcement work? Yes, if the goal is minimal unauthorized presence, but critics argue it stifles humanitarian response and long-term demographic needs. Let's head south. In South Africa, border fences and patrols attempt to stem flows from neighbors like Zimbabwe and Mozambique, but the reality? Borders are porous, and enforcement is inconsistent due to resource constraints. Now, here's the conflict. Periodic outbreaks of xenophobic violence against undocumented migrants. To resolve tensions, the government has launched sporadic legalization programs, think temporary amnesties, to regularize long-term residents. Yet, these efforts often fall short without sustained resources or broad social buy-in. If you're wondering, does regularization reduce conflict? Studies suggest it helps, but only when paired with public education and economic opportunity. Otherwise, resentment simmers. Now, Australia takes a playbook many find controversial, intercepting boat arrivals and sending them to offshore detention centers in Nauru and Papua New Guinea. The message is clear: arrive illegally and you won't settle in Australia. This offshore processing is paired with strict visa enforcement and penalties for employers hiring undocumented workers. Technically, it's effective. Boat arrivals have dropped sharply since implementation. But here's the root. International watchdogs slam the policy for human rights abuses, citing mental health crises in detention. Can deterrence justify these costs? The debate rages, pitting national security against humanitarian obligation. Let's fly to South America, where Brazil takes a different tack. Instead of militarized borders, Brazil offers amnesty programs especially for Venezuelan migrants fleeing crisis. What's more, undocumented migrants often get access to healthcare and education regardless of status. Border enforcement exists, but it's far less visible, reflecting a national ethos of inclusion. Brazil also coordinates with neighboring countries through regional migration compacts. Is this approach sustainable? The data hints. While integration eases social tensions, strains on public services remain. Still, Brazil's model shows how migration management can align with both compassion and cooperation. Now here's a twist. Antarctica. No permanent residents, no borders, and get this, no immigration law. Instead, entry is governed by the Antarctic Treaty System, which prioritizes scientific research and environmental protection. All entrants, from glaciologists to documentary crews, must adhere to strict protocols. Think of it as a global laboratory rather than a nation. So, while illegal migration is a non-issue here, Antarctica reminds us that the rules we take for granted are deeply rooted in context, purpose, and international cooperation. If only managing migration elsewhere were so straightforward. Let's zoom out and compare. We've seen two main camps: deterrence. First models think the US, Japan, Australia, and integration. First models like Brazil. Deterrence relies on physical barriers and legal obstacles, often backed by biometric surveillance essentially, making entry and stay as difficult as possible. Integration, on the other hand, offers pathways like amnesty and access to social services. Which works better? Studies from the Migration Policy Institute suggest deterrence temporarily suppresses flows but drives migrants to riskier routes, while integration fosters stability but constrains resources. Now, you might be thinking, is there a perfect model? Not yet, but hybrid policies are emerging, blending enforcement with humane integration. As we wrap up, let's tackle the future. Migration is dynamic, driven by conflict, climate change, and economic shifts. Policies must evolve. For example, artificial intelligence now helps predict migration surges, while regional compacts, think the EU-Turkey deal or Mercosur agreements, spread responsibility across borders. But real progress hinges on balancing national security, economic needs, and human dignity. Will we see more biometric smart borders or a return to open arms? Only time and political will tell. In the meantime, every country's approach is a reflection of its history, values, and the pressure points of our interconnected world. So, next time you hear about a border crisis, remember, the story is always deeper than the fence itself.